Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari 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 Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Bhadajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Bhadajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Shtapad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Astotar the Srimad the Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Astotar the Srimad the Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavini Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 26th day of May, 2020 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 13. Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. And we'll finish up texts 8 to 12 today. Should be able to finish these up. Okay, page 537. Amanitvam adambitvam ahimsa chantararjavam acharyopasanam shaucham stayam atmavaningraha Indriyartheshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityudara vyadhi dukkha doshanudarshanam asaktirana vishvangha putradhara graharishu nityam cha samachittatvam Ishtanishtopapatishu Mahichananya Yogena Bhaktirabhyapicharini Viviktadesha Sevitvam Adati Janasangsadi Adhyatma Jnana Nityatvam Tattva Jnanartha Darshanam Etagyanamati proktam Agyanam yadaton yatha Okay, we're picking up in the purport at the bottom of page 541, this paragraph beginning, the last paragraph there. As for detachment from children, wife, and home, it is not meant that one should have no feeling for these. They are natural objects of affection. But when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy, because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. One need only chant harekrishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna. Have some discussions on books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and engage oneself in deity worship. These four things will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness, following these four principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life, because in this world, one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. Happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate, as advised in the Bhagavad Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress, so one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are very happy, and when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if we are actually in the spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 processes of devotional service: chanting, hearing, worshipping, offering respect, etc., as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter. That process should be followed. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chukshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Shri Parampara. Hare Krishna. So, we are approaching the end of this wonderful list of elements of knowledge. And in this particular section, Srila Prabhupada is talking about asaktir nabishvanga putra dhara grihara shu. And that is detachment from children, wife, and home. Now here in this purport, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that it's not necessary to immediately abandon one's family if one is a householder, but it is important to turn the home into a temple. And in this way, the home can be a place where Krishna consciousness is cultivated, and one can do one's duty by one's family. In the Rishabhdev's teachings, he has this famous statement, Guru nasatsat, Swadhuno nasatta, Pina nasatsat, Janani nasatsat, Daivan natatsya napatischa satsyan, Namochi edyak samapeta mrityum. That one should not become a guru, a father, a mother, a relative, or a demigod, unless one can free one's ward, one's dependence, from birth and death. And so, if one has entered into family life responsibly, then he has to make every effort to make that home into a place favorable for Krishna consciousness, for the wife and the children. So it's difficult. It's more of a challenge, in my mind, than being a brahmachari. I remember when Prabhupada first was setting up ISKCON, and he explained the 4 regular principles, And he said, yes, sex life is allowed in family life once in a month for having children. So I think it was Harekrishna said, better to forget about it entirely. And Prabhupada said, yes. That's a famous exchange. So Krishna consciousness is based on the principles Lord Chaitanya taught, Vairagya and Vidya, Nija Bhakti Yoga. It's a famous verse by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And there's no getting around it, is that we're here in this material world because of attachments. And the main attachment is the sex life. And so that has to be, and I love this word, sublimated. Prabhupada so nicely explains at the end of the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. When Arjuna asks, Atakena prayuktoyam papam charati purusha anichanna vivashnaya baladiva niyojita. Oh Krishna, what is it that seems to force us to perform sinful activities even against our will? Anichan api iva vashna api vashnaya. So Krishna answers, Kamesha Krodesha Rajoguna Samudvaha Mahashano Mahapapma Vidhinamaya Vairinam. It is lust, kama, which is then transformed into wrath when it's frustrated, born of the mode of passion, which is the all-devouring sinful enemy in this world. And the living entity in this material world, which is, we have to accept and understand that it's an unnatural situation for the living entity. We've come here because of our unwillingness to serve Krishna and our desire to enjoy separately. And so that original prema, this is explained in those purports, that unadulterated flow of prema and love to Krishna and the loving exchange has been transformed into kama. Prema becomes kama in contact with the modes of material nature. And so there's different degrees of that covering on the living entity. The human life, the covering is compared to a smoke and covering fire. You can actually see some of the fire behind the smoke. In animal life, or higher animal life, you want to call it, it's dust on the mirror. And in lower insect life and below that, it's just like being in the womb. You can't see anything, you don't know anything. So, what is the effect? Avritam gyanametena gyanino nityavaidana. Kamarupena kontaya dushparena analena cha. That this lust, kama, covers the knowledge of the he calls it the gyanina, the knowledgeable living entity. We have all this knowledge, but it becomes covered in our conditioned state. So avritam gyanametena gyanino nityavaidana, this eternal enemy of lust. Kamarupena kontaya, and it's never satisfied, burns like fire. So then he says, "There's what is the strategy? It's just an enemy." So he describes it almost in martial terms. They're on the battlefield, after all. Indriyani manobuddhir asyadasthanam uchyate etavamohayateja gyanam avrita dehinam. That this lust infuses the mind, the intelligence, and the senses, and through them it covers the knowledge, original knowledge of the living entity. Indriyani mano buddhir asyadasthanam. Asthanam, this is the place of it. And then he says, therefore, tasmat tvamanyanyado niyamya bharatarshava. Therefore, in the beginning, one has to control the senses. Indriyanyado niyamya means to regulate. Niyamya bharatarshava papanamadhivayam gyanam vijnananashanam. And in this way, conquer this enemy of kama, which is the destroyer of knowledge, and vijnana and realization. And then he gives this interesting hierarchy. Indriyani paranyahu, indriyebhak paragmanaha, manasastu parabuddha yobuddhe paradastu sa. That the senses are said to be superior to the sense objects, superior to the senses of the mind, superior to the mind is the intelligence, superior to the intelligence is the soul. Now what is not mentioned there, but Prabhupada explains in the purport, that superior to the soul is the super soul, and who is always accompanying the soul. But in our conditioned state, the lower self is controlling the higher self. So there's that famous picture of the soul personified as a passenger in a chariot. Next to him is the driver, the intelligence, the reins of the mind, and those five senses. They painted them with the tongue on there and the ear. And they're out of control. So the senses are controlling the mind, and the mind is controlling intelligence. And the poor soul is the terrified passenger in this out-of-control chariot going down the mountain path. So what's missing in the picture is the super soul. We need to turn, this like the bird and two birds in a tree. You have to turn to our friend, the super soul. And we can't hear him directly, so we need to find the external manifestation of the super soul, which is the Shastra and the Guru, the sadhus, and the sources of knowledge. In this way, the super soul can enlighten the soul, and the intelligence becomes strengthened. And by that strengthened intelligence, you control the mind and the senses. In this way, you can control the lower soul. So therefore, at the end of the chapter, last verse is Evam buddhe padam buddha stang samyapanam jashishattam mahabaho kamarupam. He addresses Arjuna as Mahabaho, as a great armed soldier. So therefore, with your enlightened intelligence, knowing yourself to be superior to the senses and the mind, control this lower self by the higher self and conquer this enemy of lust. Very illuminating section of the Gita. So back to our purport here. Prabhupada gives a little program for keeping the household Krishna conscious. And he talks about, accepting remnants of food stuff. You have an altar, there's prasadam there. He says, he mentions the Harekrishna mantra twice here. And reading books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is a way that the family life can be molded. And but if it's not possible to do that, then one has to renounce. This is the idea is that one has to set one's priority. This is like a basic point, that your Krishna consciousness is the most important thing in your life. And if that's impossible in family life, then you have to renounce. Prabhupada showed the example. For many years, he was doing his preaching, but he was still a householder. But eventually, he found the two incompatible. And so he took vanaprastha and finally sannyas, And so that's all on this element of knowledge. Asaktir and abhishvanga putra dadagraharashu. Now, let's see. Happiness in distress. I think yeah. Happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate. Yeah, samachitvatam means to be equipoise in both pleasant and unpleasant. Ishta, and anishta. Desirable and undesirable, attaining those. One should learn to tolerate, as advised in the Bhagavad Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress. So one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. And that's the samachittatvam. Let's see, in both cases. Generally, when we get something desirable, happy, and when we get something undesirable, distressed. But if we're actually in the spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. And I read this, and he gives devotional service without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 process as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter. So the last verse is Manmana Bhava Madbhakto Madhyaji Mam Namaskaru Mama Vaishasi Yuktvavam Atmana Matanaya. Always remain linked to me by thinking of me, becoming my devotee, bowing down to me, worshipping me. And those include these 9 processes. Okay. Any comments or questions on these points?
I'm wondering if you could say something on that point that, where was it? But if it is not congenial, family life, if one's family life is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. Of course, perhaps you don't want to get into details, but if someone's like a 25-year-old girl and has a kid and then realizes that my family life isn't congenial, it's not really advised to drop the kid and necessarily drop the kid's father. Yeah, so how do you navigate that? And it doesn't seem like Srila Prabhupada really went that direction. But
no, he didn't. He wasn't talking about that. One has to somehow integrate Krishna consciousness into one's life. If one is in a situation where someone is, a child is dependent on you, you can't just abandon the child. I mean, there's a responsible way of taking vanaprastha and sannyas. Prabhupada he had an elder boys, who could take care of his wife when he left and so forth. So it's difficult. I mean, today's modern society, Western society, is so crazy, that you end up with situations like this with, single women with children. And if they're interested in Krishna consciousness, it's sometimes very difficult to navigate, all the things that you want to do. And so there's a period where you have to make adjustments until you're free to actually move forward and go forward on the path. But Krishna, I mean, there's so much one can do in any circumstance to be Krishna conscious, and we sometimes neglect the power of prayer. That if you really want to be Krishna conscious, and you can pray like anything. We heard some stories in miracles where the devotees had no way to pay the rent and the money fell out of the sky, So if one really wants to be Krishna conscious, one can be serious about chanting and fighting for it. But it's true that sometimes there's very difficult situations to remain Krishna conscious. So each circumstance is different. But I always, Bhagavatam and Lord Chaitanya movement is like, Krishna consciousness is the ultimate goal. One has to try to preserve that, and then eventually, the circumstances will open up where it become easier to be Krishna conscious. Again, going back to Kapila Dev's teachings, the Sadhu Sangashtika, one of the things that he gives as a quality of the sadhu is Mahichananya Yogena Bhakti Rava Vicharani. The same word comes in this list here, right? Mahichananya Yogena Bhakti Rava Vicharini. It's practically the same words. And Mahichananya Yogena Bhakti Rava Vicharini Matkate Chakta Karmanas Chakta Swajana Bandhava. That the quality of the sadhu, from which all the other qualities grow, really, is this undeviating devotion to me, he says. And in that context, he says, for my sake, they'll give up any activity that they, would ordinarily want to do. Matkrate, chakta karmanas, give up, And then, chakta swajana bandhava, if there are impediments, even giving up his relatives and friends, So that element is there, especially at a certain stage, for renunciation, because that's the big attachment people build. The home and the children and all these different things. And in modern age, it's not even a tradition. It's very difficult. So, but that was the Vedic culture. Is that the household, or if he's serious, then at a certain age he'll look toward renunciation, and the wife will cooperate with that. If they have grown children, then she'll go take vanaprastha and they'll go around to different holy places and start building that momentum for renunciation. Otherwise, you're ready to come back for another round. So you want to try to avoid that. Okay. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with materialistic men. So now he's talking about Aratiya Jana Sangsari, Vivikta Desha Sevatvam. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Naturally, the devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema going or enjoying some social function because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. There are many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subject, but according to the Bhagavad Gita, such research work and philosophical speculation have no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to the Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self. That is recommended here. So that's the Adhyatma Jnana Nityatvam. As far as self-realization is concerned, it is clearly stated here that bhakti yoga is especially practical. As soon as there is a question of devotion, one must consider the relationship between the supersoul and the individual soul. The individual soul and the supersoul cannot be one, at least not in the bhakti conception, the devotional conception of life. This service of the individual soul to the Supreme Soul is eternal, nityam, as it is clearly stated, nityatvam. So bhakti, or devotional service, is eternal. One should be established in that philosophical speculation. And just to go back one, near the beginning of this long purport, Prabhupada said that the key element, or the key one of these elements of knowledge, was at the beginning of text 11. Mahichananya Yogena Bhaktivedanta Vicharini. So he's already dealt with that in more detail. Without that, all the others don't really have much meaning. So he didn't really go into that in detail at the end here. One should be established in that philosophical conviction. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 1-11, this is explained. Vedanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yajnanam advayam. Those who are actually knowers of the Absolute Truth know that the Self is realized in three different phases as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. This is 543, second paragraph, third paragraph. Bhagavan is the last word in the realization of the Absolute Truth. Therefore, one should reach up to that platform of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus engage in the devotional service of the Lord. That is the perfection of knowledge. Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the Supreme Truth, the Absolute Personality of Godhead, this process is just like a staircase beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Now, on this staircase, there are so many people who have reached the first floor, second or third floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement in spiritual knowledge, he will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is not truly possible. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Although the living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, he still thinks, I am God, because of ignorance. The beginning of knowledge, therefore, is amanitva, humility. One should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against the Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. So this is a wonderful purport. Prabhupada goes through these systematically, and really these principles of knowledge form the foundation for our practice of devotional service. And this is, part of the answer that Arjuna was looking for. What is knowledge? And now he will also talk about the goal of that knowledge, which is, he's going to talk about the super soul a lot here now. And so this is Gyayam. Next verse begins with this word Gyayam, which means the goal of knowledge. Okay, so if there's no comments or questions, no comments or questions. Okay. Oh, well, that's good. All right, going on, text 13. Gyayam yattat pavakshyami yaggatpa mitamashnute anadimat param brahma nasattan nasaruchyate. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. Purport. The Lord has explained the field of activities and the knower of the field. He has also explained the process of knowing the knower of the field of activities. Now he begins to explain the knowable, first the soul and then the supersoul. By knowledge of the knower, both the soul and the supersoul, one can relish the nectar of life. As explained in the second chapter, the living entity is eternal. This is also confirmed here. There is no specific date at which the jiva was born, nor can anyone trace out the history of the jivatma's manifestation from the Supreme Lord. Therefore it is beginningless. The Vedic literature confirms this. Najayate mriyate va vipaschit, Nakata Upanishad 1:2-18. The knower of the body is never born and never dies, and he is full of knowledge. The Supreme Lord as the Super Soul is also stated in the Vedic literature, Shvetashvara Upanishad 6:16, to be Pradhana Chaitragya Patir Guneshaha, the chief knower of the body and the master of the three modes of material nature. In the Smriti, it is said, Dasa Bhuto Harer Eva Nanyasyaiva Kadachana. The living entities are eternally in the service of the Supreme Lord. This is also confirmed by Lord Chaitanya in his teachings. Therefore, the description of Brahman mentioned in this verse is in relation to the individual soul, and when the word Brahman is applied to the living entity, it is to be understood that he is Vijnana Brahma as opposed to Ananda Brahma. Ananda Brahma is the Supreme Brahman personality of Godhead. So, a few verses back, we had this explanation of the different levels of Brahman. Anna, what is it called? Anna Pucham, no, Brahma Pucham, Annamoy, Pranamoy, Jnanamoy, Vijnanamoy, and Anandamoy. And it's interesting, I mean, these are different, practically, states of consciousness of lower beings. You know, Annamoy, my ultimate goal of life is to eat, and you see that the insects, and birds, that basically that's a large part of what they're absorbed in. And a little above that is Pranamoy, where the senses, and there's a little more to life than just eating. The life energy is being, and then Jnanamoy, and that's where knowledge comes in, and the lower stage of human existence, but there's much more knowledge than the lower beings that's going on. And then Vijnanamoy would probably refers here, Vijnana Brahma, the realization of oneself as a soul, an individual soul, and Anandamoy is Krishna, Anandamaya Vyasat. He's always full of ultimate bliss. So that's the Supreme Brahman. So the knowable is basically Brahman in all its aspects. And here, as Prabhupada explains, this is the individual soul. So this is, the first step in God realization, or step in self-realization, is to ask, who am I? What am I? Sanatana Goswami famously gave the perfect example of that, inquiring in spite of all his material knowledge. He took the role of a beginner and says, why am I suffering in this world? Who am I really? And so that's why at the beginning of Krishna's teachings in the Bhagavad Gita, he deals with that in great detail. You're a soul, not the body. Your consciousness, you're eternal, never born. And so that's part of what the knowable is in the process of devotional service. And of course, the ultimate knowable is the super soul, who will be described also. And so he says, Brahman, the spirit, beginning as subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause of effect. Sarvatak Panipadam Tat. And then he seems to be describing the super soul in the next few verses. So this is we know that our ultimate goal is not really super soul realization, but it's Krishna realization. We want to understand the source of the super soul, and what Krishna expanded as. But this understanding of how the super soul is within the body, and especially what I was describing from the third chapter, how that knowledge is coming from the super soul. He's trying to enlighten us, and for millions of births, we were impervious to that. But the beginning of self-realization is, as Prabhupada explained, as Krishna explains here, humility, understanding, I don't know, I cannot figure this out on my own. And I don't know about you, but I went through a whole period in my youth, when I was 17, 18, 19, of becoming very interested in philosophy. But of course it was Western philosophy. And brilliant, guy from Socrates to Heidegger and Kierkegaard, and so many others, modern philosophers, and no one really could answer that question. There was always some confusion and some mystery about the whole thing. So until we come to the right source of knowledge, our quest will be frustrated. And so both of those things have to be there. There has to be the interest. Atato brahma jigyasa. Now you're a human being, you should inquire into the absolute truth, Brahman. Brahma jigyasa. And that's reiterated in the second chapter, first canto. Kamasanindaya priti, labo jivete yavata, jivasa tattva jigyasa, the same words are used. Nato yascheya karma be, nothing else should be the goal of one's works. So this is why Bhagavatam is so important, because from the first words of Bhagavatam, you're encouraged. This is actually the treatise that's going to deal with the absolute truth, the very goal of human life, understanding it. So Prabhupada, gave us this fount of knowledge. He just poured it forth, practically for 12 years straight. And in so many ways, through the books and lectures and letters and every chance he got, trying to wean us away from our absorption in matter, and so that we'll be inquisitive and systematically study, who we are, what this world is, what God is, what the relationship is, what is sadhya and sadhana. These sadhya and sadhana. Sadhya is the goal of life, the real final goal. And sadhana is the means to attain it. So Lord Chaitanya's teachings in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, of course, deal with the same subject and very systematically, especially the teachings of Sanatana Goswami. And here Krishna is taking us through step by step, giving us an explanation of what that knowable is, what that goal is that we should aspire for. And he will describe how we can attain it also. In the 14th chapter, again, Bhakti Vicharani, he mentions it right here also, that undeviating devotional service in the context of humility, surrender to the preceptor, and purifying our ego, our activities, our mental, spiritual, physical, everything, so that we can return back to our natural state as pure servants of Krishna. Okay. I don't believe we have any questions. Unless maybe I should ask our listeners some questions. And they can see if they can. Hi, Bal Tapas. Welcome. Thank you. Hare Krishna. All right, let's go on. Text 14. Sarvatak panipadam tat. Sarvatok chishiro mukham. Sarvatak shrutimaloke. Sarvam avritatishhtati. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads and faces, and he has ears everywhere. In this way, the Supersoul exists, pervading everything. Purport: as the sun exists, diffusing its unlimited rays, so does the Supersoul, or Supreme Personality of Godhead. He exists in his all-pervading form, and in him exist all the individual living entities, beginning from the first great teacher, Brahma, down to the small ants. There are unlimited heads, legs, hands, and eyes, and unlimited living entities. All are existing in and on the Supersoul. Therefore, the Supersoul is all-pervading. The individual soul, however, cannot say that he has his hands, legs, and eyes everywhere. That is not possible. If he thinks that under ignorance he is not conscious, that his hands and legs are diffused all over, but when he attains to proper knowledge, he will come to that stage, his thinking is contradictory. This means that the individual soul, having become conditioned by material nature, is not supreme. The Supreme is different from the individual soul. The Supreme Lord can extend his hand without limit. The individual soul cannot. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that if anyone offers him a flower, or a fruit, or a little water, he accepts it. If the Lord is a far distance away, how can he accept things? This is the omnipotence of the Lord. Even though he is situated in his own abode, far, far away from earth, he can extend his hand to accept what anyone offers. That is his potency. In the Brahma Samhita 537, it is stated, Goloka eva navasatya kilatma bhuta. Although he is always engaged in pastimes in his transcendental planet, he is all-pervading. The individual soul cannot claim that he is all-pervading. Therefore, this verse describes the Supreme Soul, the personality of Godhead, not the individual soul. So this, I'm always reminded of the these koans, like the Buddhists use, the one-hand clapping famously, and things that are meant to kind of expand your consciousness of what can be and what cannot be. And so there's so much of that in the Upanishads. Apanipado javana grihita, right? His famous. He has no hands, he has no legs, but he can take anything you offer, and he can run faster than anyone, So the idea is to expand our understanding of what it means to have a leg and have legs and have hands and be conscious, and it's difficult because we're so used to this conception. When we think of a person, we think of a body. Person means body, and this is why again referring back to the 4th chapter, text 10, Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha Manmaya Mamupashrita, that many souls in the past, having become free of attachment, fear, and anger, and practicing austerity, they attain transcendental love for me. And in that purport, Prabhupada uses, following that Vita, Raga, Bhaya, Krodha, how each of those Raga, Bhaya, and Krodha it prevents a certain class of beings from advancing in devotional service. The first is Raga. Raga is material attachment, and most people are so wrapped up in it that the very idea of spiritual life and austerity, renunciation, it doesn't come up. They're just too absorbed in the material energy. There's most people. And the Bhaya is fear. And this Prabhupada identifies with the impersonalists who are afraid of gaining another body because they identify personality with a body. And so this is why they want to posit that the absolute, the highest realization, is lacking any variety, any personality, any activity, any sense activity. Because all of that seems to be equal conditioning. They don't understand there's spiritual activity, spiritual body, spiritual love, all of these different things. They're afraid, And the anger, Krodha, Vita, Raga, Bhaya, Krodha, is, he says, this is common amongst voidists. Or it expands that definition to mean those who doubt that there's any truth at all, that there's any absolute truth. Because they've been cheated so much. The frustration of going this path, that path, this path, and they said, nothing is real, nothing is true, there's nothing. So these three are stumbling blocks for the aspiring transcendentalists. So this idea, of course, the super soul is going to be described later, overseeing and permitting, as the provider of remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness situated in every heart. I mean, whatever we want to do, whatever we, our daily activities, there's always a need for awareness, for knowledge, for remembrance. Suppose you woke up one day and you had no idea who you were, where you came here, what you're supposed to do today. That's the super soul is giving you a little problem. So we depend on the super soul moment to moment, really, to do anything, to live in this world. But we have no idea of his existence. So this is why Krishna is going to give some, several verses here describing the amazing, seemingly contradictory, paradoxical existence of the super soul. And this idea, Goloka eva nivasatya kilatma bhuta, this is from the Brahma Samhita. He's in Goloka, He's got all these pastimes. He just described them. Chintamani, he's herding the cows. He's comporting with the gopis and so forth. He's there. But at the same time, he's within everyone's heart, with every atom. This is only possible for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So when we are able to have faith in that, this is it's so remarkable because Prabhupada's books are, the word redolent. It means like fragrant or glowing with faith. There's no doubt here, and he rails against this, maybe that, So that means that he's realized this. And as he would often refer, I think we heard today or recently in the class, what is the foundation of our faith in these, amazing things that we can't check with our senses? And that is, all of, this whole parampara. Is that it's just, not just Prabhupada. Of course, Prabhupada is the foundation of it for us. But, Bhaktisiddhanta, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, all of these great towering intellects and, pure souls, they all affirm the reality of this, to the existence of it. I just want to share one thing with you. Someone sent me a book. It's interesting because this is, before your time. There was a devotee here, a godbrother of mine, and when I came first, his name was Babru. He had been a teacher in Bhaktivedanta village, and his wife was still was a teacher, still in the local Gurukul here. And eventually he took sannyas and from Tripurari Maharaj. But so this book was sent to me by a friend, and it's a book about a Kinchana Krishna Das Babaji, who was a wonderful devotee and a dear friend of Srila Prabhupada's. There's some wonderful pastimes where they met and devotees saw the great warmth between them. And so this, I haven't had a chance to look at it, but just today I was opening it up. And I read one passage, how he was famous for getting very absorbed in kirtan and being very blissful and laughing. And so what happened was that the devotees were in Mayapur and they went to see him, and he got into a kirtan, and the devotees were sitting around in a room, and the kirtan went on, and he would lead singing this kirtan. They would Hare Krishna, but then he would stop and chant some verses, and go on, and it came night fell, and there was no light. There was no lights or anything. It just became pitch dark, and the kirtan was going on. And he was, his mood, his tears were flowing and everything. The devotees were just swept up in this, And it was pitch dark. And suddenly, they saw a spiritual light emanating from his body. Everyone saw it. And, the people, they would just go nuts chanting Hare Krishna. And they chanted all the way till morning, and then they finally split up. And this is just one passage I read there. I'm going to try to read the whole book. But, having, just experiencing something like that, it just deepens your faith, for anything. And I'm telling you this story of Sarabha, which you must have heard by now, huh? Sarabha? Oh, maybe you've been up on the farm so much. This was a devotee who was actually became friends with then Mahatattva and Bhaktivedanta Tirtha. I don't have much time to tell it. But in summary, it goes back to early 90s. And if you recall, it's probably before your time, but there was a war in Yugoslavia. When Yugoslavia broke up, you may have heard about it. It was a vicious war. The Serbs and the Croats got it, and the siege. Sarajevo was under siege for years. They were taking pot shots from the hills. So he was in Serbia, or maybe it's Bosnia. I think Bosnia. There's another little, but. He was searching here and there. He was a young man, and he was confused. He didn't know what he was doing, and he eventually went into the army and came out of it. And at that time, the books were starting to get into the Eastern Zone. Harikesh was getting, and so there were some books around, Prabhupada's books. Anyway, eventually he came across the Bhagavad Gita, became very attracted, and he wanted to be a devotee. But there were no temples where he was. And there were very few devotees. So he wanted to go to Croatia, which is where Mahatattva came from, Bhaktivinoda Tirtha Swami. And there were some temples there. He knew there were some temples there. But the war was going on. And said, no, you can't go. There's no transportation. You have to walk. And he just, was discouraged. You can't do that. It's too dangerous, But after a while, he read this verse, or this line, Rake Krishna Marike, Rake Krishna Marike. So he got into chanting. He's chanting all the time. And he said, I have full faith in this verse. So he gets a backpack and off he goes. He's walking, Anyway, it's a long story, but miraculously, he was shot at several times and they always missed. Even one guy had him down on the ground and point blank with a rifle shot. And somehow it missed. He had a backpack. I talked to him recently. It wasn't really a backpack, just a shoulder bag. And there was nothing hard in that bag. He looked afterward and missed it. Hit a rock near his body and ricocheted and almost hit another soldier, and they started arguing, Anyway, one thing after another, he miraculously, through his chanting. And one of the things was he was so equipoised, which is very unusual. They would get him, and they're pointing guns at him, and he's just chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So that's kind of, who is this guy, Anyway, it's a wonderful story, which I'll tell at length sometime. Or maybe I'll leave it for Vijay, because it's in his book. I worked on the version that he has. But it's, what it is, besides being a wonderful story, it's a faith builder for us. Because he is Sharabha, who's, a nice devotee, but not really much different from us. But in the circumstances he was, at that time, the only way for him to be a devotee was to take absolute shelter in Krishna and just trust in the holy name. And really the holy name, saw him through so many dangers. And he's still a nice devotee. He's in Potomac, Maryland, But these things, really kind of deepen our faith and give us impetus to be determined in devotional service. Because who knows what's going to happen now? The economy's crashing, the pandemic is going on, things. And this is the material world. At any time, disaster could come. So we have to be ready and be chanting as we should be chanting all the time eventually. Okay, well, we have time for a couple of verses, unless we have some very urgent questions from our audience. Okay. So this is well, why don't we do the first of the Shikshastika verses? Because that's always fresh. We should chant it every day, actually. It says, that there's a Palashruti for the Shikshastika. Yeah. Not written by Lord Chaitanya, but written by Krishna's Kaviraj. It says, the eight essential verses Lord Chaitanya wrote to teach the practice and the goal of chanting Krishna's holy name. Day by day, whoever sings this hymn will surely reach a little closer to perfection. Spotless Krishna praying. So the first verse has 7 metaphors, and they describe in detail the benefits of chanting, especially in congregation. Chaitodarpanam arjanam bhavamahadavagni nirvapanam shreyakaida vachandvikapatadanam vidyavadhu jivanam anandam buddhivardhanam patipadam purnamitaswadanam sarvatmasnapadam padam vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. All glories to the chanting of Shri Krishna's holy names, which easily extinguishes samsara's blazing flames by polishing the lust-encrusted mirror of the heart. That chanting is the waxing moon that knows the secret art of causing the white lotus of good fortune to unfurl its petals far and wide throughout this bleak and blighted world. Of transcendental knowledge which will take us to life's goal, the chanting of the name of Krishna is the life and soul. The ocean of ecstatic bliss floods far beyond its bounds wherever Krishna's merciful and mystic name resounds. Indeed, whenever Krishna's names are sung in congregation, at every step one tastes a joy that knows no limitation. So hear with great attention as I earnestly request, please chant Shri Krishna's holy names and be supremely blessed. The soothing nectar of the name will bathe your consciousness, bestow pure love for Krishna, and eradicate distress. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bo.